Björgólfur Gudmundsson was one of the most famous figures in all of Iceland, and only the second person in that country's history to reach billionaire status. He made his fortune in the 1970s and 80s in shipping, publishing, and communications. In the 1990s, he was prosecuted for bookkeeping offenses having to do with his shipping company Hafskip, receiving a suspended sentence and putting a sizable dent in his fortune. Amazingly, he was able to make back all of the sizable amount he had lost over just the next few years, starting a successful brewery in Russia. This operation, Bravo Brewery International, came under scrutiny for possible ties to the Russian mafia, particularly after a rival St. Petersburg brewery burned to the ground. Despite this, Bravo was sold to Heineken in 2002 for $400 million. Later that same year, Gudmundsson returned to Iceland and entered his most financially successful period. In addition to holding a large stake in Iceland's biggest publishing company and a 45% share in its second largest bank, the former football player was able to acquire 90% ownership of West Ham United of the English Premier Football League. During this time, he also became known as his country's biggest philanthropist, making him a well-known and popular public figure. His donations to arts programs, universities, and sports organizations helped to fuel his country's culture. But it only took the blink of an eye for the national hero to become a national disgrace. During the worldwide economic crisis of 2008, Iceland's banking system underwent an almost total collapse. Iceland's media singled out a few key figures in their national banking system that helped contribute most to the collapse, and Gudmundsson was front and center among them. His enormous fortune evaporated within a few short months as the value of his holdings plummeted. In March 2008, he was named one of the richest people in the world by Forbes magazine. By December of that year, the same publication declared him to be worth nothing. In 2009, he declared personal bankruptcy to the tune of $750 million, still thought to be the largest individual bankruptcy claim ever filed worldwide. Even the international press took notice. In 2010, Time magazine named Gudmundsson one of the 100 most influential people of the year due to the role he played in destroying Iceland's economy. Alan Stanford first began to build his fortune in the early 1980s as the Texas oil boom was coming to a close. The area was in an economic recession, and Stanford's investment group made a killing buying up real estate in depressed areas and strategically selling them off after the market had recovered. With seed capital from this company, Stanford moved to the Caribbean and started Guardian International Bank on the island of Montserrat, but was soon forced to move to Antigua due to a British government crackdown on shady offshore banks. The newly renamed Stanford International Bank, under the umbrella of parent company Stanford Financial, operated for the next 2 decades and seemed to offer impossible returns on investment. Stanford had amassed a personal fortune of over $2 billion when it all came crashing down beginning in early February 2009. Based on statements given by a former Stanford financial executive, the Securities and Exchange Commission announced that they were launching an investigation of Stanford Financial, questioning the ridiculously high returns the company was offering its investors. The former executive claimed that purely hypothetical financial data was presented to potential investors as facts, and that Stanford himself had claimed that his certificates of deposit were as good or better than the US government's. By late February, Stanford Financial's offices were being raided by federal agents, and Stanford was being charged in a massive ongoing $8 billion fraud. SEC investigators would later describe it as a Ponzi scheme, siphoning billions from investors while blatantly falsifying records to make it appear as if investments were generating a profit. In reality, the SEC claimed that the company had no income and that its bank statements were complete fiction. While awaiting trial, all of Stanford's banks and business holdings were taken over by various governments. After several health-related delays, he was finally put on trial in early 2012. A jury took only 3 hours to convict him of 14 charges related to his outrageous fraud, in addition to fines and penalties totaling more than $12 billion, far more than he was ever worth. Stanford was sentenced to 110 years in a federal prison. His earliest possible release date is in 2105, provided he can manage to live to 155. Still, he did get less than half the sentence prosecutors had asked for. Patricia Kluge was once incredibly rich, but her fortune was not exactly self-made. It came through her marriage to media mogul John Kluge, whose company Metro Media had gained ownership of a large number of television stations by the mid-1980s. In 1986, Kluge sold those stations to 20th Century Fox, making them the backbone of what would eventually become the Fox television network, for an astounding $4 billion. At that time, John Kluge was the richest man in America. He had married Patricia, a former exotic dancer 35 years his junior, in 1981. During their stays at John's shooting ranch in the Scottish Highlands, Patricia tried with a limited degree of success to make friends with neighboring royalty. Disaster struck, however, when the British tabloids got their hands on nude photos from Patricia's past after the couple were asked to host an event for Prince Charles and Princess Diana. This forced the couple to retreat from the public eye, and it was only a few years later that John asked for a divorce and indicated his willingness to pay up. The divorce settlement made Patricia an instant billionaire, speculated to have been worth $1 billion in cash alone in addition to several extravagant homes. One of these luxury estates, Albemarle House in Charlottesville, Virginia, was to become the ultimate drain on Patricia's fortune. On its grounds, she hosted lavish parties for celebrities and elite friends, and decided that the grounds ought to feature their own winery. She spared absolutely no expense in making this dream a reality, employing pricey consultants and French wine masters, and filling hundreds of imported oak barrels with wine that, as it turns out, nobody wanted to buy. Patricia made only the most half-hearted of efforts at marketing her wine, failing to establish a regional market before attempting to go national with a marketing campaign that barely existed. Predictably, her entire billion-dollar fortune, along with the value of most of her assets, was sucked into the black hole of the winery. After filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, Patricia finally had another stroke of good luck when in 2011 the winery was purchased for about a fifth of its original value by none other than Donald Trump. It continues to operate today under the name, what else, Trump Winery. Sean Quinn began building his fortune in 1973 with little more than a $200 loan. He began extracting gravel from his family's farm and selling it to local builders, and before long the business had expanded enough to allow it to transition into cement. Quinn used the profits from this business to gain financial interest in an impressive number of diverse sectors. By 2008, his Quinn Group employed over 5,500 people and had interests in hospitality, glass, real estate, plastics, and health insurance. And Sean Quinn was the richest man in all of Ireland with a net worth of over $6 billion. Unfortunately, one of his boldest investments would also be his ultimate downfall. Quinn and his family, having gotten their start in construction, were eager to capitalize on an Irish construction boom in the early 2000s. They began funneling money into Anglo-Irish Bank, the single biggest lender to Irish construction companies, and before long the family owned a 28% stake in the bank, a fact which they kept secret from other stockholders. In all, the family pumped over $1.3 billion into the bank, and Sean Quinn would later admit that he illegally used derivatives known as contracts for difference to invest money back into it. Essentially, this means that Quinn was gambling on the fact that his shares would go up, as a contract for difference, or CFD, allows an investor and a broker to pay each other the difference in the value of an asset as it changes over time. This gamble failed spectacularly, as the financial crisis of 2008 caused the value of the bank's shares to dramatically fall and led to its nationalization in 2009, in effect totally wiping out Quinn's investment. He was declared bankrupt in Ireland in 2012, and that same year served 9 weeks in jail for inappropriately stripping the assets of his company and failing to cooperate with government officials. Not only did his entire personal fortune go up in smoke, but all of his business holdings are in various states of seizure as well, because he still owes a whopping $3.5 billion to the bank in which he once had partial ownership. Born into success, Ike Batista was the son of Brazilian engineer Eliezer Batista da Silva, who worked in the energy department of the cabinet in Brazil's government and was responsible for helping transform the mining company Vale into one of the world's largest. At 18, Ike enrolled in college at the University of Aachen in Germany, but dropped out soon after to pursue a faster path into the business world, returning to Brazil and working in gold and diamond trading. At the age of 23, he had made his first million and started a gold trading firm that would be valued at $6 million within its first 2 years. Between 1980 and 2000, Ike Batista's companies generated over $20 billion from gold and silver mines in Brazil, Canada, and Chile. By 2011, he was named by Forbes magazine as the 8th richest person in the world with a net worth of $30 billion, the 58th most powerful person in the world, and the 2nd most powerful person in all of Brazil, behind only the president. However, Batista's forays into the oil and natural gas industries would swiftly lead to what many financial experts would later call the quickest destruction of wealth in history. Batista's company OGX was involved in the exploration for and production of natural gas, and their initial surveys indicated that they were sitting on deposits that were worth up to $1 trillion. This turned out to be wildly optimistic, as most of the company's wells were found to be complete duds. Similarly, the company ridiculously overestimated the amount of crude oil its petroleum facilities could produce, speculating that they could pump out 750,000 barrels a day, when in reality they could only ever manage about 15,000. OGX was forced to file for bankruptcy in 2013, but this was simply the largest factor in what was called a perfect storm of financial catastrophe. A serious downturn in the precious metals market at around the same time, combined with poor management decisions and fluctuations in the economy, led Ike Batista's personal net worth to plummet to negative $1 billion in only about 18 months. He has written in the Brazilian press about his regrets in mismanaging his companies and fortune, and claims that he will leave no creditor unpaid.